I'm Alan Gilbert. I'm the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties of Vermont. My organization has been working on some of these issues. I've seen this film 4 times now, and I have to tell you, it doesn't get easier the more you watch it. In fact, it gets harder. And tonight I was asking myself if some of my reactions were partly triggered by the report that came out yesterday that officers in Burlington were justified in shooting a 70-year-old mentally distressed man in his own apartment and killing him. It wasn't that I was surprised at that determination, because I think the determination was actually correct under current law, the way it's interpreted in this state. That sort of shooting is justified, just as the shooting of Tamir Rice in Cleveland in this state would be justified. So I think what I was feeling more than anything else tonight was disappointment at the work that I've been able to do, the work that my organization has been able to do to ensure that these kinds of shootings don't happen. And you're thinking, well, you know, the shooting of Phil Brennan in Burlington back in March had nothing to do with the SWAT team. And I would grant you that's correct. But I'm afraid it's the same mentality that has seeped so deeply into the way we do law enforcement and into the guidelines that police use when they do use force. I think in Vermont we're extremely lucky to have the police we do. We have very few of the incidents like you watched here tonight, although we did back in December have a no-knock search warrant service in Burlington that resulted in the death of a man. So we're not immune to this kind of stuff. But I think my main message is we got to really change things. I mean, we cannot continue to think it's okay to kill people who are innocent, maybe have a mental illness that they themselves don't understand, but we've got to find a better way of doing this, and we have to prevent. In the film tonight, talked about some of the police officers who killed in the line of duty. They're affected as much as anybody. In the Burlington case of Phil Brennan, we now have a 23-year-old man who has killed somebody who he didn't have to kill. And that's a sentence that's going to be with him for the rest of his life as well. We can't put people in these situations, and I hope moving forward we can find a way to deal with a lot of the problems that this film brings up.
Hi, my name is Mark Hughes. I see a lot of familiar faces here, and first of all, just wanted to thank Jared, you personally, as well as the library and the public, is it the public television service that's doing this?
Vermont PBS.
Vermont PBS, thank you very much. This is good stuff. So I wanted to also acknowledge the cameraman, and I'm honored to be sitting between Alan and Tony here. I know both of them personally, and I also wanted to give Alan a shout out. He probably is going to choke me later, but your service is really appreciated. I know many of you already know about it, but he's going to be stepping down here pretty soon. A long, hard push that you've done for us here in Central and throughout the entire state of Vermont. It's deeply appreciated, and we will miss you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Big shoes, and I don't know if there's anybody around to fill them yet. And Tony, I mean, I just want to thank you for the hard work that you and your folks are putting in the local community. I wanted to throw out just a little bit of a factoid. We did invite Brandon Del Pozo down tonight. He was non-responsive, and we also invited Matthew Birmingham, the state police commander. He was unavailable. He actually did respond. He said he was going to be he was traveling. So I just wanted to throw that out for everyone. I'm in an organization called Justice for All. I'm the co-founder. The other co-founder sitting there, my partner Allison Cerrone. And we started Justice for All about a couple of years ago, and one of the things that we thought was if we could insert ourselves in the journey, the trek to identify and dismantle institutionalized racism and have a role to play in educating, informing, empowering and healing communities, then maybe we will have done some good. And yeah, we do have some challenges in Vermont. As far as the film is concerned, that's the first time I saw it. Jared, you did send it over. I got about halfway through it, and I think I got distracted. But very, very powerful message. I recall the discussions that Jared and I were having leading up to this, because clearly there's a much larger discussion than militarization. I was surprised to see former President Nixon's face at one point, but I'm not surprised because there is a war on drugs component. I thought that was well covered. It just went in so many different directions, as you all probably noticed. So there's a lot to talk about, but I think in short, as far as this whole really complex issue that we're talking about is very, very complicated. I'm retired from the United States Army. I'm also certified. I used to jump out of planes too, by the way. I'm certified as a security professional. I'm also the town chair of Vermont Democratic Party, and so I see a lot of different angles and a lot of different things. I also spend a lot of time talking to folks like Tony, so I can see both sides. One thing that's deeply disappointing to me is just the overall level of deaths that occur at the hands of law enforcement officers across the entire United States, not just on no-knock warrants. And you can track that on The Guardian. There's a site called The Counted. If you just do a Google on The Counted, we had about, I want to say over, I think it's around 1,200 last year or something like that. So it's just, there's a huge problem that we have, but it's very complicated. And I'm interested to hear the thoughts of everyone else mostly. I'm glad to answer any questions. And yeah, it's a complicated discussion.
I'm Tony Facos. I'm the Montpelier Police Chief. I've been in law enforcement in Vermont since 1985. This movie, I must say, was very, as you can imagine, very difficult for me to watch. And one of the things, though, that I do applaud about the movie is Jared and Mont Public Television, everybody brought this here, though, the timing is perfect for the conversation that must occur in all of our communities and even at the national level where it's happening. And also, like, a shout out for Alan as well. So I've been a police chief, I gotta say, not one of us organizationally will have the answers to what we need to do. The big problem that's immediately in front of us after the situation in Burlington. But listening to Alan, we've been on, we run into each other frequently, and one of the things that I'm very proud of, though, of my work in Vermont is around improving the response to people in crisis, and that's something that, Alan, you've been there, and before me, I came on the Act 80, it was called, Law Enforcement Mental Health Training in 2008. A little bit about my background really quickly. I'm also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. I've spent also a graduate of the DEA Basic, DEA Intelligence Analysis School. I've done a lot of time in supporting drug enforcement efforts here in Southern Vermont, specific to Montpelier, but certainly operations and around the area that impact Montpelier. But I'm also an FBI trained negotiator, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done with the Montpelier Police Department. Our emphasis always has been on conflict resolution. We have 3 active negotiators right now. 2 of us are no longer active. But our commitment to the sanctity of life, and that's a really important concept that the Police Executive Research Forum, it's a think tank, basically down in Washington, D.C. But if we dance around the legal standard of Graham versus Connor, it's kind of like what action is legally, it's justifiable. And I'm not referring to any particular incident, but we always have to Monday morning quarterback situations and find out better ways. And one of the things, the sanctity of life, and I've even posed this question to my own officers here in Montpelier, do we fight, do we do everything we possibly can to make sure we are saving a life as much as that EMT, that emergency room, trauma room doctor, things like that. And that is certainly the framework how we try to approach these. And at the same time, I have an obligation, and every one of my officers, that they go home at the end of their shift. That I've, first of all, brought the right people into our organization, but then I've got to give them the training, the skill sets to do their job. And it's a very difficult job. But fast forward to where we are right now, this is a really challenging time for law enforcement. And I don't want to get back and forth on statistics, but also we're seeing ambushes on police officers at a high as well. But this is not just, hey, well, they started or whatever. We are in a crisis mode and we have to rebuild. And I think this is a great opportunity to do that. And I also would ask that everybody also look at maybe start with your own community first before I am challenged to answer the questions of what's happening at the national spectrum in a post-Ferguson, post-Snowden era of lack of trust of government. And we did go wrong. And there's a very important document that the Montpelier Police Department has used as the cornerstone for strategic planning, and that is the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. There's 6 core pillars. The city of Montpelier has even, City Council has even put it into their goals. So it is even that important for us to make sure that what are we doing? Much of that we were doing right, but of those 6 pillars, the very first one, it goes right to this movie, is the trust. And what is the public trust and legitimacy exactly? Our authority comes from you, and we are part of your community. And there's a big conversation that's also germane to this: the warrior versus the guardian. The warrior, in simplistic terms, is that Marine in Fallujah. He's an occupier. He is there to bring a peace, but he's not part of that community. The guardian is genuine. The guardian is somebody that cares about that community, is part of that community, and that's kind of. I dumb it down to TV shows. Think about Adam 12 and just dealing with the day-to-day, handling problems that people just need a little help handling on their own versus some of the stuff that's out there today. And I gotta say, all the police periodicals, in 12 months, I don't think you'll find more than 1 or 2 that you will not see an M4 carbine, a Bearcat armored personnel carrier, or something kind of exotic looking on the cover. And unfortunately, that's part of the, why the warrior discussion, and we don't have time for that, but the warrior conversation really came about post 9/11. Our mission across the country, from fire, EMS, changed dramatically. And that's one of the areas in our current contemporary times where we've lost our way. So I'll leave that for the rest of where I'm at.
Can you tell us what towns in Vermont have received military equipment, and have any of them had to return them because they didn't use them in a year, or are they all still using them?
I know 7 Days covered that about a year. Alan,
There's actually a list that a couple of newspapers, I know 7 Days published it, and we have it up on our ACLU website. There is a list of towns that have gotten equipment. Off the top of my head, I'm going to guess it's somewhere around 50 towns, 50 departments, all told, counting state and county and local.
that have considered military weaponry or just military weaponry?
Have participated in the 1033 program. That's the thing. I mean, some towns, some municipalities, police departments have gotten things like typewriter ribbons and really mindless stuff that shows up in military surplus.
Yeah, I think that's excuse me, I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope to the discussion, because there's some equipment, say for example, like your typewriter ribbons, or maybe even flak jackets, like protective equipment. That's completely legitimate, and it came through the program. I mean, we're concerned about the tanks, obviously. I think Burlington had to give back a big truck and maybe some night vision goggles or something like that. But maybe night vision goggles, it might be a good idea. So the question is what do we really need to police? And then it goes sideways from there, because I don't really know, and I don't know. Tony?
Well, one thing that I can't say, we look at what's the big picture on this in Vermont. There's one MRAP. That's a mine-resistant armored personnel vehicle, and that was acquired by the Vermont State Police. So if you see that statistic, you can see Waterbury. So anything you see Waterbury, it's not the Waterbury Police Department has this truck, but it's one of 2 armored vehicles that the state police have. The state police, by the way, have the only qualified by national standard SWAT team or tactical services unit in the state of Vermont too. So I just want to throw that out there as well. And equally important to that, to TSU, the Vermont State Police Tactical Services Unit, is the Hostage Crisis Negotiating Unit. They are just as, they come as a package. But again, if some, and that the only time that I'm aware of that the state police have deployed that MRAP was to rescue people in a high water situation in Berry City. And then there's also the other vehicle is a Bearcat that was acquired through Homeland Security funding, and that's a law enforcement purpose-built armored vehicle. So none of these vehicles have weapons mounted to them or anything like that. These are very defensive vehicles in their nature, that they could get either law enforcement to an area of danger or extract and rescue people that need to be removed from that area.
One thing you should know, there was an effort in the legislature last session to require approval of local municipalities before their police departments could get any military weapons through the 1033 program. That bill that was introduced by Janet Ansel in Calais, as a matter of fact, was put on hold once the federal government, after the Ferguson situation, decided that the surplus program needed a second look. And what happened was the federal government actually restructured the way the program works, and there now has to be a central accounting by each state of the weapons that are coming into departments. The bill that I started with was considered again this year, and the legislature deemed it was unnecessary, and we actually agree with them on this, because there's now reporting that's being done by the Department of Public Safety of all the weapons that come into the state, go to departments, and if they're still there. So there is now an audit trail, so people know where things are that did not exist 2 years ago. And a lot of that was because citizens got really angry about how the system was working. So we at least now know where this stuff is, if that's any consolation.
And just a quick anecdote, and before we go to the next question, is the first time that I really had a personal encounter with Tony Facos. He was dressed in his uniform. He was all tacticaled up and everything. He came in our
Regular uniform.
Film viewing. This is his regular uniform, okay? And he comes barreling in there, and I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was that cop in the back. But the point is just that there's a certain amount of just regular dress that our police officers have. I don't know whether any of you could agree with me, across the state and across the nation, and they're just dressed for work like they do normally, and they still look scary. So I wonder if there's any, of course we want to protect our officers, but at the same time there's this balance of us citizens feeling comfortable with just walking up to one of you on the street saying, "Help, I lost my dog."
And I make a point never to be wearing a uniform when I'm meeting with Mark.
You had a question?
Okay, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that Gates from Los Angeles was the person who invented the SWAT team. But I'm wondering how it just became ubiquitous throughout the country. Did it come down from the feds? Where was the central decision made, and how was it made to promulgate them all over?
It was a lot of local level, but it certainly got to the point where we went from dealing with this war on drugs, if you will, to 9/11 happening, and then it just put this whole ramped it up on steroids. There was suddenly funding for in Vermont. I remember very specifically writing grants to get asking for some equipment. We just wanted. After 9/11 for Chief Hoyt, trying to just get protective body armor, outer armor that would stop rifle rounds, not the vest that we wear every single day, that we're required to wear every single day. And I couldn't get that. And what happens, anything that had to do with any of the Vermont State Police special teams, it was a pass-through, so we didn't have access to it. But there were a lot of other pieces of equipment that just went unchecked. Communities were buying, whether it's a huge fire truck that they couldn't or a command vehicle that they couldn't maintain or support. They were just getting, and it was just so you had a congressional overreaction fueling this, and also what was the real need? What's the justification? Because quite frankly, when I see tragedies even here in Vermont, to me it also says all the more reason for a very specialized response capability. But again, based on protection of life, doing everything that can possibly be done to save life.
So then it was federal decision to start handing out military surplus? That,
Certainly things were ramped up. Night vision, camera systems, and bomb detection, bomb squad response, a lot of things that are normally would be very specialized. And I've had conversations with people that later were involved in the oversight of some of that. And it went unchecked. We just had to, it was almost a very knee-jerk reaction to a country after a atomic attack.
I think the 1033 program, the surplus program, was started maybe in the late 90s, 98, and it was a very small program at first. And then as more equipment started coming back from the wars we were involved in overseas, it became much more active, there was more available. The one question that I had, Barry, that's kind of related to what you asked, Tony, do you know if there are any statistics kept on the people who have become members of SWAT teams? Because it seems to me, when I watch this movie and I've read other things about SWAT teams, it tends to be a high percentage of ex-military people who are on the SWAT teams. And is that accurate, or?
I don't know. I don't. A former Montpelier police officer, she's now an FBI agent. She's on the Albany Regional SWAT team. She's one of the 4th female, I believe, in the FBI. She was hired from right from Georgetown when Montpelier picked her up. She's an amazing agent, just happened to come back to this region. So, but she had no military background, and some of the others, I think, were career agents. So it's a mixed bag. I can also tell you that when you talk about the hostage rescue team with Quantico, most of those, the aviators, they mostly come right from the Army Special Aviation Regiment, 160th Night Stalkers, because they only fly SEALs, Green Berets, and so on. So in very unique specialties, you will see that, but as far as that across the board, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just worry about the militarization of our country generally. I mean, we spend such tremendous amounts of money in our federal budget on military stuff, and we have a large army, and we've become, I think, a much more militarized society than we realize.
Can we go over here first? I think you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, I have a question about weaponry. So many people get shot, and the police are upset, the victim's dead. Why don't they use tasers more? I know there are ways of quelling wild animals, and wouldn't it be appropriate to...
Well,
Here goes Tony.
many years, no, it's a very valid question. Many years ago, I very strongly tried to get tasers, and many of you in the audience know what I went through and know the discussions, and also that I listened. And thinking that we need something in between what we have. The taser is certainly, and as time we've seen, it's not the magic response, but we said, boy, could that be a better option in lieu of. So, but at the 11th hour, I pulled the request for tasers before the city council could vote on it, because first of all, it was not an appropriate process. It really started dividing Montpelier. And that was the one thing as a police chief and somebody that's from this community, I didn't want to tear them apart. The city council wanted to support their police department. At the same time, people that were vocal to the council were saying, this is not right for Montpelier. It's barbaric. I mean, and there was a lot of concern. So at this point, I have not asked for them since. I think we're learning a lot more about tasers over time as well. But if it's something that might require deadly force, so we spent a lot of time training in Montpelier since I've been chief, and that was the one thing I made clear in my interview process, that we do not train enough for those high-risk, low-frequency situations. So
There's a hand up in the
Yes.
back of the room as well.
Yeah, so I had 2 points. One is that during the movie, I had a thought very similar to what Alan had expressed earlier about not just about how many former military people are possibly in SWAT teams, but there was a discussion about, there were a couple of references to, well, the people we're working with, from the police's point of view, have changed. They're not the people they used to be. And, I think that I watch mysteries so many times, and I watched a CBC program which was about a guy who started out, dealing with marijuana, and in the end, a lot of people who had been kind of in black ops in Iraq had gotten into this, drug situation, had become part of the kind of drug overlords and had changed the whole environment. And I do think that it is a serious problem, not just the militarization of the SWAT team, but the militarization of the drug dealing populace. So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The real question I have is for you, Tony, as the chief of police. What type of training are new police officers undergoing right now? And do you see any areas where we might offer them more support so that they really understand how to de-escalate situations? I guess, what's the current training and how could we be doing it better?
Well, that is the big question, and I'm going to quote Alan. We do law enforcement on the cheap, and it's something that we wrangle with on a regular basis, whether we're dealing with the curriculum for improving law enforcement interacting with people in mental health crisis. Right now, the officers, we have one of the shortest academies, probably on the East Coast, police academies. A lot of, and many departments in Vermont have part-time police officers that are out there doing regular patrol. And a part-time police officer, essentially, it's 1 week of training and then 60 hours of field training, and poof, there you go. And they can be faced with the very same situations that, a 10-year seasoned veteran that is, could be a trained negotiator or what have you, is facing. So you have a broad spectrum of what your response capability of police services is in Vermont. So that's one challenge, because we don't fund it effectively. So a lot falls on what does each individual department invest above and beyond the core training. So the basic police academy, it's just that. It's just teaching officers everything from motor vehicle law to domestic call response and everything in between, with some scenario-based training. And by the way, scenario-based training by far is one of the most important elements that we're just not doing enough of, because that's where we can really be immersed in a situation that's very realistic. We do this every year in our department, but it's very expensive to do that, and it's a huge time commitment to do that. It takes us 2 days to get everybody through one cycle of training. So, and right now, every police officer will be required July of 2017 to have the Act 80 training, what we refer to the Act 80 training. That's simply an 8-hour block of instruction on, basically it's an awareness level course on law enforcement interacting with people in mental health crisis, and barely skims upon traumatic brain injury and a little piece on autism. The next level, what we've done that's not required, but it's called Team 2, and that is the brainchild of Mary Moulton back when she was the Commissioner of Mental Health for Vermont. And what that is improving a joint response model, which I'm very proud to say was much based on the Montpelier PD and Washington County Mental Health relationship in our response. I've always had Washington County Mental Health when I needed them responding to a call. And so what the Team 2 model is, it's all around the state now, it's a statewide initiative, is that it brings the clinician, the emergency crisis worker, together in a training environment with their law enforcement counterpart. And that law enforcement counterpart is somewhat carefully chosen. I mean, it's got to be somebody that really gets it, somebody that really wants to do a better job. And so law enforcement's response really should be, and this is the frustration of Chief Del Pozo and any other chiefs that have had tragic outcomes in these cases, is that law enforcement really is there for safety. We are not the clinicians. We are not the psychologists or psychiatrists. And so what the Team 2 model does, through scenario, tabletop scenario, walks through who was responsible for what. What are the, we take a scenario, what are the clinical issues, what are the legal issues, and what are the safety issues. Because at the end of the day, we just want to make sure everybody's safe, but get that person in crisis to that more appropriate level of care. And so that's kind of where we're at now, but that's not a requirement. There's other training in Hartford, Vermont. They're using the CIT, or Crisis Intervention Training. It's a 40-hour block of instruction. That's something we would look at as well. But only the Act 80, that 8-hour block, is going to be required for Vermont police officers. And the good thing is that it's both for full-time and part-time police officers.
Tony, would you mind if I spoke a little bit to training? So one of the things that we've, hi Elizabeth, I keep seeing you. One of the things that we're doing with the Human Rights Commission and Migrant Justice, as well as the Peace and Justice Center, is sitting down with, some of you know Rick Gauthier, sitting down with the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council and implementing a fair and impartial policing policy requirement, as well as the associated training. And this has been dragging out for years and years, probably much to Alan's consternation. And so we'll be sitting down next week and hopefully finalizing that. But I just wanted to add on to that, because I can see where you're going with the question, is what type of training are law enforcement officers required to take that would potentially mitigate or even eliminate something like this from occurring. And you should know that by statute that there is, I believe it's 25 in-service hours that all law enforcement officers are required to have annually. Within that, there is, if I'm not mistaken, weapons qualification, first aid. And then every other year, there's a requirement that they would also have domestic violence training. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when you start talking about, what else can go in there, what you will see in addition to what was already mentioned is hopefully there will be some fair and impartial policing training that would be incorporated in that as well. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
Laura, I guess you've got your hand up.
Two things. The first is, what happens when no knock, as we saw it in the film, converges with stand your ground? It just seems like a recipe for conflagration. I mean, if the mindset of the citizenry is, it's my home and I get to shoot anyone. Right. And the mindset of law enforcement is, never mind who we are, just drop your weapons and submit. And by the way, we're pointing some at you.
So do you mean this from a legal sense or from what really happens?
Well, a legal sense, I doubt very much that stand your ground enables you to shoot the police.
I think that's
However, since the police don't seem to bother too much with meaningful introductions when they do the no-knock, it seems like going out of your way to put everyone in harm's way. And it seems like it would be especially dangerous in those states which have chosen to enable citizens to shoot intruders and not worry about consequences. I just wondered if anyone has been looking at this.
Can I answer that one?
Sure.
And the second thing is a question as to the feasibility, if the police want more trust from communities, of affirmatively producing and making a database of all the use of force incidents. Because if you want to access this, you've got to pay. Generally, you've got to pay. I know Tony made them available without, I don't think I had to pay anything.
You did not.
When I got yours. But if you want it from the state police, I believe there's a pretty hefty fee. If people are asking to be trusted, I think they should enable us to verify to the extent that that's possible, at least try and get a better handle on what they're actually doing. And I realize these are accounts written by law enforcement, so there's still questions, but right now it's a very hard thing, and people have to rely on the media or lawsuits, but nobody's showing their hand.
Well, in answer to the second question first, regarding transparency on use of force, we are looking at it right now. Rutland's already semi-doing it, but it's still kind of in beta form. Burlington is also looking at a dashboard on the police websites that's going to track a variety of situations, such as domestic calls, but also use of force. It's not going to give you the particular names, but it'll give you a summary. And also, too, you can start seeing that in the context of, well, if there were 25, like from Montpelier, let's say 25 use of force reports, first it's important is what's our policy regarding when do we document that? In other words, is it compliant handcuffing? where somebody's sir, turn up, hand on your back, okay, sure, and not a DUI, or having to take somebody down because they're tensing up, they're about ready to strike you, and you bring them to the ground. That's not light handcuffing. That requires use of force. But on that dashboard, being able to see, there were 300 arrests done, and 25 of those arrests or situations required use of force. So that ratio is important. In an ideal world, what we're trying to get at, when I say we law enforcement, to get to part of this, solving this problem of public trust, is when the public has essentially the same data, types of crime, violence, use of force, all that I use as an administrator to make my decisions. We're really kind of getting somewhere as a true community policing model, because there are no secrets. And we're working on it. It's not ready for prime time, but we are. And I also encourage everybody to kind of hold law enforcement leadership in your jurisdictions accountable for those questions. Where are you at with that? And so that is very important that information is available to the public. As far as the other question about no-knock warrants, I got to say this job has changed dramatically in the 1980s and 1990s. We did no-knocks pretty regularly. I wrote many of them myself. And in Vermont, it says, you shall execute a search warrant between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. And it was, if I asked the judge, Your Honor, concerned about destruction of evidence, I mean, boy, I wish I could go back 30 years now or 25 years and fix a lot of why I did what I did. We would get no-knocks pretty regularly in Vermont. Then it got to the point like, wow, a lot of cops have been getting shot because of, instinctive reaction of protecting your turf. Not so much that standoff of, am I legally right or are you legally right? And then, so we're like, well, this is not such a good idea. Even the training that I've had with the DEA, I'm like, whoa, a couple things. One, make sure you're clearly marked. When I don't know how many warrants I did in that time period, badge on a chain around my neck and plain clothes. And now we always make sure that if you look at our tactical armor in Montpelier, it's blue, but it'll be very clear, white police in the front, white police, Velcro patch in the back. And also, I think that no-knocks, you better have very specific reasons why you're doing that. And we don't like doing that, or the Drug Task Force, or generally our federal partners, because of that danger. It's incredibly dangerous. So unless there is a specific need, so for example, in Montpelier, I've done, the last no-knock I personally wrote as a sergeant was because there was closed-circuit television on the porch. So we knew we had to use speed. So we didn't have time, because once, even though we had to hit a second floor, we knew once we were on the first floor that they would know we were there. So speed was that was a rare situation. Going over it today, I don't know if I'd still do it that way. And ops planning, written ops planning is very important too, to document why we do what we do. Because do we have a medical, do we have a safety plan? And is there a better, and again, what's the objective? And again, what's the right thing to do?
Search warrants were one of the sparks of the American Revolution back in the 1760s. The famous trial that James Otis was the attorney who was arguing against what they were called writs of assistance that allowed the king's agents to go and search for contraband in the homes of alleged smugglers. And it's just interesting to me that 250 years later, we have the same concerns about the same sort of things, the invasion by government of your home. And it's a flashpoint, and it's, I think, currently a particularly dangerous one, as Tony is saying.
I'll just piggyback onto that and just go back to what happened in Burlington at the end of last year. I'll kind of scratch my head, frankly, Tony, because I'm thinking, okay, so this guy's selling drugs, he's in the Old North End. I took a personal interest in it, just as a side note, because I've been watching the Old North End pretty closely, because the Old North End is the epicenter of diversity in this state, period, end stop. Okay? So we were on record, as an organization, to the City Council, the Public Safety Committee, saying, hey guys, ease up. War on drugs doesn't work. Don't do that. What happened? This is what happened. Okay, and it was frustrating because I questioned, I says, why is it important? Why didn't they catch him in the grocery store? Why, if they knew he had a muzzle loader, Why did they line up, what was it, 16 agents? Well, actually, Brandon says it was, directed by the DEA, and it was maybe 13 agents, a couple state police and a couple of his police or something like that. I don't know, do you? Whatever happened there, anyway? What was the final word on that? Eric Miller said, let's wait and see.
Yeah, it's still a pending report.
It's still a pending, so we'll forget about it. So the point I'm making here is just that I'm really frustrated with that happened, and I just don't think it was necessary. And I don't think any reasonable or prudent person could justify why you got 16 people shooting 18 rounds, bang bang shoot them up throughout the Old North End to catch a guy who's selling drugs they know has a muzzle loader with a no-knock warrant. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. If I knew, as a law enforcement officer, and this is Monday morning quarterbacking, as a law enforcement officer, if I knew that this guy has a gun and he's selling drugs, then I'd wait for him to leave his place. And if I did issue a warrant, I certainly wouldn't issue a no-knock warrant if the guy had a gun. So that kind of bothers me. But back to the transparency and accountability piece, though. Again, the conversation is a lot broader. Because we got to stop at some point. That was me with the mic. At some point or another, we got to stop picking on the police too. Because there are so many discretionary decision points throughout the entire criminal justice system where people have latitude to make decisions that impact marginalized communities, black being one of them, okay? And we tried to do that with some of the legislation back a few years ago. I won't go there. That's for another series or something, but I just wanted to say that there are a lot of folks making decisions throughout these processes, and I think, yeah, we need to hold the police accountable, but that transparency and that accountability that we're talking about, what we're talking about is where do we, as I think Elizabeth's question, where do we have how do we have visibility into these decision-making points? So we, first of all, so people who are making decisions know we're looking. And then the second one is so that those who are doing the right thing can be rewarded. So those who are doing the wrong thing know that they can be held accountable. And as Deming said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So if there is an issue, so we can see how to go about correcting it. So transparency is huge as far as the data, race stop data, the data that we've been trying to pry out of the hands of most law enforcement folks for the last several years is finally becoming available, being the last state beside Mississippi to make that information available. So there's just a lot of stuff we need to do across the entire justice system to be able to gain that transparency and accountability so we can bring some of this stuff into control.
Michael, did you have a question?
It really struck me in the movie that the most amount of compassion I saw was the wife of the murder victim.
Yeah.
To the police, and I didn't see anything on the police end. We were at Driving While Black a little while ago. We were, the New York Times did a series of videotapes on black people talk about race, white people talk about race, police talk about race, and when they got to the police talk about race thing too, it was the same thing. There was absolutely, seems to be no ability to examine, to look from the other viewpoint. There's just a line drawn and that's it. As far as the SWAT thing goes, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, you've got this equipment, you're going to use it. I didn't see anything new to me except the numbers, which were shocking, and the idea that, boy, if you don't use this equipment in a month, or a year, whatever, you're going to, it's going to be gone. But I just don't see any self-examination from the other point. The wife of the young man that was killed in Ferguson was on VPR today, talking about her book too. And it's just the same thing. You look at all of these, I don't see anything from the police end saying, how did this happen? And I think a lot of this is just like what goes on in the Middle East. It's self-fulfilling. We buy into a mythos. We say, gee, this is the situation we're in. We've got to go in with guns blazing. I grew up in the 50s. I knew the cop on the beat. They were somebody that you went to.
Right.
Now, I don't know. I don't speed. I have a radar detector in each of my vehicles. I want to know where the police are. And I'm in healthcare. I work in a critical care unit. I'm surrounded by women at night. I deal with people that are coming down from drug overdoses, and very angry that we gave them the Narcan.
Mhm.
I deal with people that are having the DTs, and they're visually and auditorily hallucinating, and they're violent. And we seem to be able to manage them, even when they become physically violent. We're not tasering them, we're not drawing guns on them, we're not immediately. When I grew up, a cop used a billy club. Now you've got videos of 6, 7, 8 police officers, one guy standing in the middle, and everybody's shooting him. And I just don't understand that. And I'm wondering how we're making the selection of who gets the job.
Well, first of all, you gotta, I think taking a step back, if we all saw this movie over and over again, or movies like it, we are not getting the full perspective of the tens of millions of police interactions that happen in this country that do maintain public trust, that do help people. We get in this business to help people. I'm surprised if you're in the healthcare position. I mean, you generally, there's a fair amount of interaction between law enforcement and people that work in that environment. That's usually one great place for relationships to build.
In the ER, maybe in the ICU, no, this just doesn't.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, yeah. So it's, and again, and that's, I can speak for our officers. I mean, there's 3 core things we look at for a high-performing organization, a good police department. First and most important thing is, who do we bring into the organization? And we're dealing with human beings. We're not perfect. But our batting average is a heck of a lot better statistically than the medical community and the malpractice that's going on. We're not talking about that. And there's statistical evidence about that. So my point is, we're not, we can't throw out the doctors. But what we have, going back to what we have a chance here now to this conversation is, what do we want in our communities? Where are we going wrong? Where we think we're going wrong? And at least start asking the questions. Because when we hire somebody, there's, yes, we do a background test. Nobody wants to be a cop, by the way. I mean, we have, we are struggling. And it's not just when I say we, there's 25 agencies right now in Vermont that have openings. Montpelier has one right now coming up. First time we've had in over 3 years. So, and all we're doing is we're just robbing from one department to the other. So first of all, when we do get that candidate, thorough background investigation, and what we do, we spend a lot of time in the interview, not just to rattle them, but to see really what's their character. Do they have the same ethical values and grounding that we have in our organization? Then the other thing for that 3 high-performing piece, then we've got to train them and train them well. And that's back to your question, what are we doing in Vermont? And this is something that, Al and I, we have multiple committees, multiple groups, State House, otherwise, about the level of training that we get. So it comes down to what does each individual department do? And that's really the question is, what does each individual town want to spend? And then the last piece is making sure they have the right equipment, including defensive protective gear to do the job effectively and safely. Good police cars, good weapons systems. First thing I did as a chief, we didn't have any lights on our handguns or any weapon systems. And people thought that all by itself was militarization of Montpelier Police Department. When in fact, well, wait a minute, statistically, 3/4 of shootings occur in a low light situation. Well, let's give our officers every chance to make sure that can they identify in a nanosecond of, is that a cell phone in that person's hand, if we can, or a weapon, or firearm. Things like that. So part of that is also perception. Because and when we think about firefighters, we don't question that they put on that Nomex suit, that air pack, and they go into a building. But I guarantee if I had my heavy armor right now on, and my Kevlar helmet, you would look at me very differently. Look at how that's militarized Montpelier police officer. Well, what have I done? I've simply said, whoa, I've got a ballistic helmet to protect my head, and I'm wearing now a plate carrier that will stop rifle rounds. And in Vermont, how many deer rifles are out there in this state? I would say Fish and Game have the most dangerous job. So anyway, so all that, but it's having the conversation. Are you comfortable with your police? Ask questions. And 'cause we also want the opportunity to say, look, this is where our priorities are. Nothing in line with what you want.
Can I get each of your opinions on civilian review boards and civilian review boards with teeth and investigative power?
I can start. They're a good idea, but unless they have subpoena power, they usually
That's
don't
the
work.
teeth is what I'm talking about. Should there be some in Vermont?
I would say yes.
What about you?
I have a mixed feelings on that. Part of that is important. The other challenge that we can struggle with is that they don't have the expertise. They have not been a police officer. They have not had the training. They have not been in that situation.
Are you saying that only police can judge what police do?
We have courts for a reason.
You want
I know, we have-
civilians to trust you.
Mhm.
So, as she indicated, there has to be some kind of
Sure.
mutual relationship, and having civilian review boards, they don't have, they may have investigative power and they may have subpoena
Mhm.
power, but they don't have the power to throw people in jail. So it's not as if it's an equality of.
Right.
of
But again,
power.
I think it's vitally
Or
important. If I were to review any other difficult profession, I should have some expertise in that profession, so I know what I'm looking at.
So the medical review boards have people with expertise who review things. The state has a medical review board, and they're not all doctors. So it seems to me the analogy would be similar, that you could get people with a level of expertise and weren't necessarily police.
Can I rant on that for a minute?
Well, she's on to something, though, that's been talked about a lot.
Yes.
Police are one of the few professions in this state who aren't licensed. The Office of Professional Regulation licenses almost 50 different professions, from tattoo artists to lawyers to doctors to landscape architects. Police are not one of them. They're certified, and the certification comes when they've graduated from the Vermont Police Academy. The only way that an officer can be disciplined in terms of no longer being a police officer is not through a licensing system. It's when they are decertified. Currently, there are very narrow grounds for decertification. You basically have to commit a felony while you're a police officer to lose your certification. So the two officers in Rutland who recently were accused of racial profiling, cost the city $1 million to settle in the lawsuit, they are still officers. They cannot be decertified. Officer Hatch, Lewis Hatch, state police, who has been sued numerous times because of racial profiling, and who recently left the state police, was fired. My understanding is he cannot be decertified because there are not grounds for him to be decertified. So we think that one of the best things that could happen would be if police as a profession would accept licensing, which is what most other professions do when they want to be considered professionals. I think that would actually take care of a lot of the concerns that you might want to see addressed through civilian review boards. And Tony's right, when you don't have people who know something about the profession, you have a problem. That's actually the reason why select boards and city councils are some of the worst people to have oversight of police, because they don't know anything about policing. You really need the profession to be policing itself, and to have people sitting on those boards who also represent the public. That's where the balance comes in, and we've not been able to get there as a state.
Why not?
There's a lot of, my opinion is that if you think local schools are decentralized and they like local control, police departments are exponentially more so. And the idea of having some sort of a centralized system with a state-level body that has control over licensing has not been very popular among police departments.
See, I want to chime in here because I'm glad you said what you said, because that was probably 3/4 of what I was going to say. But what we do have is we have the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, okay? And they, as Alan just said, they do certify, and thankfully they have the ability. They have just been given statutory ability to at least require or oversee the implementation of certain policies and trainings and so forth. But as Alan just said, if you're a professional, if you're in a profession, why would you not be regulated under the same organization? I think it was Act 248 back in 2012 where they tried to do it, and I think it crashed and burned. And I think the reason why this is coming up is the question is really oversight. It's all about oversight. How can we get that proper balance? Is the State Police Advisory Committee or Commission, is that effective? No. Is the Law Enforcement Advisory Board doing it? Are the commissioners in Burlington doing it? So there's various places where it's trying to be implemented, but as Alan said, you got things spread out all over the place. you know, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think if we could finally just get these guys under the right oversight, Tony is probably cringing right now, but to get them under the proper oversight, the same oversight that my doctor is under, that my dentist, that my tattoo artist, that my bartender, that all these other folks who are professionals who have responsibility for, as we say, public safety, you know, put them under that, then I think all of these other things in terms of oversight, in terms of even, you know, the issues that we have in the investigative and the prosecutorial processes and our failures that we've seen. And I don't want to speak illy of Bill Sorrell, but, you know, if we start taking a look at, you know, the prosecution rate, or I should say the accountability rate of, you know, the uses of lethal force that have occurred across the state, you know, it begs the question of where is our transparency, where is our oversight, and then you can answer the question, where is our trust? And you can answer the question, where is our legitimacy?
Rachel's going to stop us.
I am going to stop you. This is a really important discussion. I really thank all of you, Alan, Mark, and Tony, for coming here, and for all of you participating in this discussion. But we do need to end it now. And the peace officer is still showing.